Bem-vindos a Brasília, a capital que, por meio de suas linhas modernistas, traçou o futuro de um país de dimensões continentais e enfrentou o grande desafio de integrar Norte, Sul, Leste e Oeste no desenho de uma sociedade mais justa, democrática e igualitária. Bem-vindos ao Brasil. Ficção científica do passado, capital das águas, quadradinho, avião. Reconhecida por vários nomes, esta cidade criada para ser a morada de uma burocracia que se alternava no tempo, um não lugar, cedeu aos afetos e se transformou em lar nas mãos de seus habitantes e nas gerações que ali se desenvolveram. Gostaríamos de tê-los aqui conosco, compartilhando das belezas de nosso céu, de nossas águas, de nossa cultura, de nossa gastronomia e de nossa gente. Porém, os desafios trazidos pelo momento crítico que o nosso planeta enfrenta nos impedem de vivenciar esses momentos com vocês. Mas de uma coisa podemos ter certeza: se a pandemia de Covid-19 nos afasta fisicamente, ela também nos aproxima ao nos fazer relembrar de que os desafios que a humanidade enfrenta necessitam ser enfrentados conjuntamente, reconhecendo que todos nós compartilhamos de uma condição que nos faz humanos. Se por um lado não estamos juntos, por outro nunca estivemos mais próximos em nossas preocupações e necessidades. Vamos juntos avançar sobre os problemas globais que se impõem. Vamos juntos construir democracias melhores, mais transparentes, mais responsáveis e mais participativas. Sejam bem-vindos à Conferência Internacional de Comissários de Acesso à Informação 2021.
De novo, olá a todos, perdão, eu fiquei no mute aí. Eu sou Carlos Musso, diretor do escritório da
My name is Carlos Mus. I'm director of the CEPAL, the Commission Economic of Latin America and Brazil. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation of the hosts of this meeting, CEPAL. And it's also an honor for CEPAL to be over here to treat a theme that is so nice and so important around the world, about the commissions, about the environmental, the human rights, and the effort that the countries of the Latin America are doing to implement the Principle 10. I believe that Principle 10 will be something that we had almost 30 years ago, and I believe that most of you know, but it's something that society since 1992 knows that it contains the access of information to protect the defenders of the environment and the human rights, and the recognizing of the environment as a part of these rights, as it can be, as to share this environment, the sustainable environment that we have. And I'm really glad that I can participate on this meeting. This region consolidate the Principle 10 within the principles of 10. I'm sorry that I'm repeating, but it's how we can say about this region had so dependent of the natural resources when you think about the most one nickel to treat and talk about these. I believe that it's a challenge for most of the countries around here, this region, to have these structures of this distribution of results that can be used by everyone and also be sustainable. The region, as we can say, it has been kind of lucky because we have a lot of natural resources, but also at contrary of different times, the rest of the world are talking to us to know what we are doing with these resources. It's not always that we can discuss this principle 10 within within the ESG, informed, social, and governance. And I believe that we can need to have an attention with this because it's an environment, because we are changing climate around the world, and social because we have this. We need to count the distribution of these results nowadays. We have the debate after the financial crisis of 2008, and this in 70 years. And I believe that we need to understand about the asymmetries and the unequals that we have inside the different regions around the world. So we need to understand this around this region, that practically what we are living since the we were colonized. And I believe that when you think about this region, the G part, it has been gained a lot of highlight when you think about the governance. But the big companies, they have to follow up. They need to understand about CNN and FTC of how we work and how they gain money from the stakeholders. And those stakeholders is not the classic definition that they are searching for their own profit, but they want that the world to be more sustainable. So we need to optimize that inside our standards. And I believe that in the crescent form, we need to cover up this. And that's real. I believe that my last line is not so brilliant, but the bad governance brings prejudice. So we need to understand this. The companies already knows this, and they are aware that the bad governance over the environment of the division, social division, or even the inclusion of the social part, they will be worked. So we are working in this group. They need to work and control, and we need to work all together to know this bad behavior. And also, of course, the own state needs to understand this. So we need to understand about these companies and people, because we need to understand that the state are in the middle of this. So let's have today a debate over this. I would like to emphasize the word G for governance, because we can't only be stand and preserve and distribute. We need to understand what it's going to result for us as a society. And G is important as an information. We always use the principle of the free expression and the free access to data. And unfortunately, many times this opening, this logical opening and basic, when you think about democratic rights, they are being used in a wrong way to propose and to use, I mean, really directly. The questioning about institutionalities that were consolidated in process of law processes for all. So I want to offer this moment, this first cycle of participation for Maria Antonia, for that she can start and putting to use these parts. So you know data access, the access of information. We need to understand this because she was a negotiator. She participated on the process. So I believe that we had in the idea of this settlement in Rio de Janeiro in 2012, we had almost 7 years of negotiations. So it's really nice to understand this because we have a participation so strong within the civil society, this opening sport, this opportunity, historical, because most of the countries of the region accepted this, and we want to follow up this one of the 10 principles that it's to bring the civil society or bring the stakeholders to speak a little bit about what they think and what they want, what they wanted to have, this commitment within the state, within the access of information, and the defenders of the environment and the human rights, and also how to talk to them. I would like to say thank you one more time for your presence. I would like to remind that we have a chat to put these questions. So let's do this debate that it's so interesting because it's the last one.
Pena que muitos de vocês não puderam ver.
This is a result that many of you, I'm really sorry that you couldn't be here in Brasilia because it's a city that is so nice when you think about, because the city were planned, and we know that the planet is not determinate. We have conditional, we have the patrimony, we have the use of the areas, about the inequalities. I don't know if it's the most wealthy, but it's also the most unequal when you think about the country here in Brazil. When you think about protecting the legacy of planning here in Brasilia, we need to settle these social demands. How can we do this, especially when you think about in a time of lowest resources, lowest budgets, changing of what it is the sustainable resource to use in the city? It's something that we can talk. So please, Maria Antonia, I would like to have you with us, and later on I will talk a little about your curriculum and I will present you later. But just to pick up the spirit of information and to start this process, I will pass on the word to Maria Antonia. We have a presence over here that is a person who is so relevant for this debate within this acting, international acting, and not only Brazil, and also an excellent representative of the civil society. So we have here this opportunity to listen to Maria Antonia. Please, Maria Antonia, thank you so much. As we say in English, the floor is yours. You can start. Thank you so much, Carlos. It's such a pleasure to be over here. I'd like to say thank you so much for the invitation. I'm over here as an observer. It's so nice to be over here with people who participated on this process, not only as an academic part. I'm starting all of this process that is so meaningful for this region that we live. I would like to say a little bit more about the context that the settlement were adopted. As Carlos said, we had more than 30 years that we have this declaration of Rio and Principle 10 that brings up the sport of the environmental rights. And many countries have adopted on these constitutions, on his actions, but we have a process so wide that we try to put this on use. In 98, we have the Irish settlement on Europe who implemented the Principle 10 in the European context, and they do an opening spot for another countries to understand who adopt this. And 2010 with Argus 20, the countries of the Latin American Caribbean, they do their settlement for the Latin American Caribbean. So I believe that Joara will say a little bit more about this process because she participated in all of the process. But I would like to bring a little bit more to think about the paradox that we have in the Latin America, because it's a region, as Carlos said before, that is so wealthy on natural resources, but also the economy is so based on these natural resources and external demand within commodities. So I believe that is a whole part of the paradox to search and developing that is more sustainable to understand this demand of the natural resources that we have, because they were so affected by this. That's so why this region is always being used as one of the worst for the defenders of the environment. That has also been threatened, and they have a context so challenges to do this environmental protection over here. At the same time, the Latin America, it's a region that it's so progresses when you think about the environment, because we are in the center of what we are talking over here. And most of the countries have adapted the right of the environment. So we need to understand that this region has a civil society that it's so big and so strong, and it has environmental legislation that it's predicted that allows in most of them that the civil society brings the actions against the stakeholders who have been threatened the environment. In the work I talk so much about the climate litigants, and I like believe that we are growing in Latin America exactly because when you think about this processual context that it's so favorable with this, so I believe that over here in Latin America that have been so normal and existent in most of the countries of the Latin America, and of the environmental rights and the human rights, and I believe that all of this begins within the centers of the environment as a strong mm, that motivates this activity. And most of all, I would like to say this, that we are saying about this climate change and this in this context. I'd like to say a little bit about the American Cartoon of the Human Rights, that it's so important when you think about the context and the participation,
2017, numa opinião
and recognize this that were adapted.
o direito ao meio ambiente como fundamental para a existência da humanidade.
So they recognize the right of the environment.
Transfronteiriços ambientais. Desculpa que eu estou acostumada a falar desses assuntos em inglês. O português.
The responsibility, the extra responsibility when you think about the damage of the environmental rights. And I believe that this is so important, this recognition of this responsibility beyond of the borders that we have. When you think about climate changes over here, and I believe that on this context, I believe that on the environment, it has the effort of Escazú that finally that were applicable in 2021 for the region of Latin American Caribbean. That's so innovative and progresses when you think about the environment and the rights. So it brings new rights when you think about this context, and some that were recognized, some that were new and important. It's so similar about the Argus conference in Europe, but I think that is so interest that the Accord of Escazú brought this regional context inside to for the normative that we had. So the Accord brings So the settlement brings to know about the indigenous communities for things to be that's so meaningful for the Latin America that has been working together. When you think about this peculiar parts within this, so it's not a settlement that has been done in a general matter when you think about the processual rights. So what I've been saying without having these three pillars that we said, well, the principle of this that were adopted of the three pillars of processual rights when you think about the right of the access of the information and access of justice. And what I think and what I understand and that this brings this concepts regional context. What I think is the three additional pillars that is in the right of the environment, that it's a principle that we did, but it didn't happen on the August Commission, but also the protection of the defenders of the environmental, that it's the five pillar, and the sixth one is the capacitation and cooperation, that I believe that it's central point for this accord of Escazú to work to be implemented and to really be effective for this region. So now we have this task of implement this as settlement, and we have many challenges that we are fighting. We have development of the diversity and the plurality of the values that we have of these questions, and we have this uncertainty of the knowledge of the environmental knowledge. There's so much thing that we don't know of the Amazon and the study that has been done, and what we are losing that I think that we never will learn about, and about the environmental risk that we need to understand exactly what we are dealing. So when we think about this, so we need to understand of the countries that adopted the settlement of Escazú and that people who signed it but didn't do exactly. And how can we understand something that's already being done today? And how can we implement this? On the conference between ports, and we have many names that will be performed, especially about sport and implementation. And I believe that we can understand and say a little bit about this question part about the governance that Carlos said, about the possibilities of companies in a way of implementing this settlement of Escazú. And I believe that's been each time more relevant on this climate part, that I believe that it is a huge part of these two areas, and we can talk a little bit more later on. Thank you so much. Maria Antônia, I believe that you said you taught us a little bit about your expertise and you are really updated. I don't know if you are on the North Hemisphere or if you are over here, but I believe that you can follow up so much this debate about this implementation of not only about the environmental right, but in the corporative right, administrative, and eventually, when you think about the formalities that can exist. I believe that in the part of the civil right, we want to do something of the many definitions when you think about the sustainable development of the next generations. So the justice has this role of guaranteeing those who are not well represented. It can be the minorities, but it also can be the next generations that will be over here. How to follow up those determinants when you think about international careers, or it can be established in the constitutions. I believe that we have a lot of things that we need to understand I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that I participated so much in the Green Protocol that it's a term that started in 1995 of bringing this declaration from finance declaration and the commitment that we have on the bankary supporting. And that it's really nice, that it's really hard, and not only now, but after the almost 10, 15 years later on that the central bank entered about how to manage the risk. And I believe that this is something else that we need to talk. Not only about the present, but for the future that declared this. I have another part that I would like to say that say not only for CGU that wants to use, but although environmental passive can be a social passive because societies, especially the state, need to do this compensation, need to do this of this passive of the environmental. Who needs to understand how to put this into one person that we need this prejudice that will be for the entire society. And then when we think about society, we need like to bring Suara that has an action that is so active within the civil society, then as a representative of the stakeholders participated of the negotiations, and I believe that she can complement what Maria Antonia has been said about what is this negotiation, what is the final result, and how Maria Antonia have been alerted. The process has not been over. It's not only because it's been written, oh, because it has a reference about the Congress, but how to do these implementations and the norms. And the interpretation, something that is really subjective, is it can be on the right or it can be for the society to understand. So please, Joara, the floor is yours.
Prazer enorme estar aqui.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. For those who are listening to me, it's such a pleasure to be over here. I'd like to say thank you so much for this invitation of our colleagues here on CGU, and especially to say a little bit of something nice on the last 2 years that we have been doing such a difficult access within the pandemic and different questions. That is so nice.
O Acordo de Escazú. Eu vou compartilhar minha tela. Eu peço para o Carlos ou para algum colega me
To
avisar.
share my screen so that you can see. I prepared a little presentation for this that after the speech of Maria Antonia would be so much easier. Please let me know if you are seeing everything. Yes, we can see it. It's a green and yellow screen, so. Well, I would like to start just to say, what is the principal plan? I believe that my colleague said a little bit more this, and it's predicted in Rio 92 together with 27 principles. And what it brings that the best way to treat the environmental question is make sure the participation of every citizen who are interested about national level with access of relative information about the environment has a new public authority, including about materials and dangerous activities in their communities. To opportunity of participative process, the state will facilitate and stimulate the conscientization and participation of the popular, okay, using the effective access mechanism of law and administrative. This happened in 92, so it's a little bit longer. I were born yet, but most of them weren't born. So it's a long path that we had so far. And it's so nice to talk a little bit about this of people who fought about this and who left their role in talking about this. Oops. How can we implement this principle that were predicted on Rio 2092? We have a lot of parts of implementation that is settlement of Escazú that I brought this because we don't need to wait for this to happen to start to bring this principle to be implemented in different forms. So we can see that we have reference of the principle 10 in laws and national legislations and norms, legislation of many countries, the settlements. When we are making a decision, we can see mention about Principle 10, the support of this. And I bring examples about CGU that before this were working together that quote Principle 10 as a reference to bring on these decisions, those public policies, many declarations, international declarations that quotes the Principle 10 in companies who have this reference, the importance of this information and access of justice as a part of this decision. We are talking about democracy, we are talking about governance, of sharing governance. And we also see in the last years about a mention that is so directly when I think about the open government, when I think about sustainable work. This is the part 16 and 16.10 that didn't let me lie about this. It won't let me lie about the principle 10. And we think about always about this the three informations, the participation, the support, and justice. I want to think about the information question. But the show today is dedicated to this Acordo of Escazú. I would like to say a little bit more about this for you today, that it's my reference, my experience together with different people who were within this meeting, within the negotiation. I would like to say here with Silvia Capelli, Rubens Bort, with Renato Morgado, who were my companions over here in the civil society that worked so much for this to put into use. So the performance of the settlements, and we had the Rio 20 that 10 countries had a statement saying that we need to discuss how can we put this principle to work? And I would like to call on attention, highlight this, that when we elaborate this, we didn't know that this were a settlement, if it can be a law, if it were settlement, how it works. This fundamental role of a technical part of preparation of studies. And Carlos said before, we had 2 years of pre-negotiation of say how can we negotiate this, and then 4 years of negotiation itself, so 9 meetings that were open meetings with the participation of the civil society who were transmitted within this documents who were before. So we had a reference when you think about this government of sharing governance, and we had 24 countries who signed it and 12 ratifications, and the settlement started to work in April 22 of 2021. So we are all working together now, hoping that briefly we had we have our first meeting of implementation that Maria Antonia had been talking about. I would like to say a little bit about those lessons of the process that I believe that is so nice to understand, something that the settlement brings us on the first part. So we have this first conference, we have the opening doors of this conference, but we learned it so much of the 6 years of negotiation and pre-negotiation. The first thing that we need to learn is that Escazú settlement was negotiated about the consensus. So it's not a discussion of a text that people talk it, that, oh, we need to understand that the most of them will win. No, we all need to be nice of everything that we were discussing. So this is so important when you think about implement that everyone can participate, everyone negotiate, everyone give in a little bit. So we need to understand that this tax was discussed with a consensus of 24 countries. So this is so nice as an international reference that we have. And Mariana also said about Arus that it's the European reference that we have and think about all the process of the civil society on this moment and negotiation of ours that is so important as a reference because we need to learn what is well done and what's not well done. So we need to understand that this reference within this negotiation. And over here, I'd like to say a little bit about the backstage. We had Some people were in a couple moments in the Asian negotiation that follow up the Alcasul negotiation because he wanted to do something that it is almost the same in that region. So we bring this as things that were born of this meeting. So we need to understand that this was discussed in two languages, also in Spanish and English, and a couple moments three because Brazil were there, and we discussed it in Portuguese also. In a couple moments of the meeting, we started to discuss in Portuguese because we need to understand, oh, how can we say this in Portuguese? Because we had this necessity to include everyone and not leave every anything behind. So this is something that we have done. The discussion were online, and as I said, for a biggest diffusion, the documents were sent previously, not only for the public, for the people of the civil society, but for the person of the countries. So it is a security when you think about the law, because we need to be well informed, we need to study before you enter this room of negotiation room. So we had virtual meetings and groups of work. Brazil was a leader of the group of work on the access of justice. And those meetings of those work groups, they happen at virtually as a way to understand the positions of the countries and try to work ahead a little bit about these trips, because when we arrive into this negotiation, we have this documents who were pre-discussed that we need to know what are the positions that those countries would like to have. So we had the participations of specialists, also as Caribbean and within the Latin American. And it's so important that we can think about this. When you think about the Latin American Caribbean, we think about two realities that it's so distinct, that it's so different inside of Latin America and also inside the Caribbean, because they have different characteristics between this. And we think about this different process of negotiation, we think access of justice, and we have social parts that it's so different, and they put on the table and they discuss it and they have been done this settlement. So it's a lesson that's so important, and because we need to understand that it is possible to do. And the participation of the social part, we think about the governance, we think about the sharing governance. We understand that many of the times of the civil society, mostly of the social part, have been thinking a little bit that can discuss, can have troubles, or will make it more slower, or will have a problem, but we have a knowledge who has been gathered inside of this. So in a way, we need to do a solution that's so important. And I couldn't be saying the side of this how the participation of the civil society is important and were crucial to understand of this. I would like to say this, and I would like to say that one of the articles of Escazú settlement were about discussion of the environmental. It weren't on the first document that we said. And when you think about the historical of Escazú, it was small work over here with three lines inside the settlements, and then it started and became an article. And today, the settlement of Escazú was now about the first international settlement that has measures of the environmental support. So you can see how it got bigger and bigger and started with an innovation. We had the participation of people who brings these examples and show us why it's fundamental to be on the right. It got relevance, and we had a lot of things to work, and the countries who learn it, who ask it for more information, bring this. So it brings us this settlement and the article of settlement, sorry, to discuss this. Specifically, when you think about the three pillars, when you think about the Principle 10 and the settlement of Escazú, when you think about access of information, we have principles who are communication principles of transparency, maximum process. When you think about talking about budget, or principles who were inserted inside the settlement, we have the reference inside of these, the quality of informations and everything, the importance of you to have more process connected with justice and everyone to know what is happening. The equality on a basis to understand this basis of opportunity. The test of public interest, when you think about informations, of specialists, of access of information, who understand this, and this importance for you to promote this information, and the risk of you to promote and also not promote this. The words settle on this, who are worked within the settlement, because bring us most of the security within the law support, because people, the servants who were doing had this information, had this international reference, and until this settlement of information within diverse countries. So we know exactly what we are doing. Alcasul settlement, we're working together because I know that the sky is the limit, but we need to understand how we are doing and how we know what we are doing. And I would like to mention that they have an article where the managing of information, the translating of information to know exactly what we are doing, what we are evaluating of the public policies, and also allow these studies who work these comparative studies with the parallelization of information, everyone collecting the minimum of information, the same format, allowing us to have a big analysis of developing how it works and why it works, because we need to have this analysis, regional analysis, this optimal use. When you think about the regional part, that is something that it's always predicted inside the settlement that can allow us to analyze the developing of the countries on the future. We have an incentive to the use of functionality. When you think about the companies, that's something that we have been doing, the enhance of the functionality of the civil society. And I believe that the part that we like over here brings also not only the civil society and as the government, as person who work capable of share this knowledge and also to receive this. It's something that we can always learn together in this exchange between this is something that is predicted within this casual settlement. The exchange of experience, technical support between the countries and inside of them together. I would like to say the point of transparency and opportunity to lower the risk when you think about the public health. This is a gain that's so big that it's predicted when you think about SCASU support, when you think about a threat of public health. The settlement brings this information, and it's so important for us to deal within the prevention support, dealing with emergency, climate emergency. And one more time, we are thinking so much about this. It's so important that the settlement to have this reference not only for the creation of the alert systems that we need to understand something that's the temporal alert, but it's always predicting that these countries can develop these tools for the society to follow up and mitigate this risk. And now, so for the standards of Alcasul who were incorporated within many international reference, when you think about banks, international banks, when you think about the critics of the society, that think about how the settlement of SCASU and the countries who will work, who will implement, they have an advantage within this because it brings a security, a juridical security when you think about dealing with a person that wants to know what we are investing, where we are investing, how can you get more gain when you think about environmental gain, or when you think about not destroying the environment, not bring prejudice. When you have this policies incorporated within this country, you need to understand because you can have more opportunities to receive these resources. So it's a simple math because you won't be putting this on your country if you can manage this. That it has many conflicts when you think about environmental conflicts. So it do this as an again as something more. I would like to say a little bit more about the conflict implementation and prevention. It's part of the principle that says that before the conflict happens, we can do that before it even happened. We can discuss the questions, the doubt of the of the citizens, and we need to understand that this, in this context, it is the best option. Systematization of this and the fundamentalization of this decision. We need to understand that this can be done on that time, and everything is public. Everything is well done and well schematized, because we are saying that we have a system of protection of the environment that has a lot of groups together. When you think about the stakeholders, I need to understand what is the context before the perform of this work. If you can see it's going to be 3 to 5 years, you can act in the prevention of this conflict, so it's going to be more simple. And it also has this mechanisms of judicial mechanism and alternatives, and the criteria of informalization of this. So we have this part of the settlement. We also think about informalization, the use of different language, and SCASU brings this information that it's so wide about the vulnerable parts. When we eliminate this, and we live in a continent that it's so unequal because the person had different difficulties, and this needs to be bring together, not only within the access of information and the participation of the social part. I don't like to say so much a little bit about the access of justice. We have this process of it predicts that if you need to put on a judicial form, we need to establish in a way that it's a different way. I'm always adding because I know that I'm saying a little bit too more. Like to say, excuse me about this. When I think about this, and as I said before, the settlement of Escazú says an article that is especially dedicated about the defenders and the work of these people who need to predict these attacks. And when you think about it, it's more, you know, each understand that they want to keep working, they recognize the importance of the work, and also the support of having a stigma to know who is this person who is fighting about the environment, who needs to be well seen and not become a problem. And later on, I'd like to say a little bit about the opportunities that we can discuss for the last time that we have the settlement of Escazú and the settlement of Paris. We say that Escazú it's in the middle of part that we need to understand new ways of selling and the innovating companies, because we are changing paradigms. We need to not uh, give in our natural resources. We need to be innovators on this point because it's already been happening. We don't need to wait until 2020 to start of doing this. When you think about sharing governance, or the department working together, the local learning, because we need to understand that exist persons who are already been acting, already been working, possibly have the solution for something that we are working. That's something that we are trying to innovate. So if you have more sharing, a best decision we can do. So we to work together with different countries and different people. And you have the point of big data, big data. When you're using the information about environmental protection, we think about the data protection. When you share data between persons, so we have a better analysis of the diagnosis. Then we need to inform about this decision. So we have different elements about the society. I'm really sorry to extend it myself because something that I would like to say so much. As you can see, I'm at your disposition to talk a little bit more later on. I would say here, I have my reference, please. Thanks so much, Carlos. Thanks so much, Suara. It was one of the best exposures about the subject, especially in Portuguese because it's so nice. And all of us know these restrictions of Portuguese when you think about on UN. And thank you so much for those who know a little bit more. But I believe that now you can see the scope creep. I would like to make a question for Maria Antonia. because she's also in the north. Do you see that Alcaçu settlement is almost as the rules for the game? Does this type of establishment, when you think about judicial form of our public, when you establish these rules in the game of how to do the discussions within the impact of the environment, and a little bit about the human rights and the conflict that many times can occur, it's something that the countries involved can mention when you think about the Inter-American Court, they can see as a path to use because the concept is almost impossible to avoid, but you have the rules of the game. Please give me your reaction about this. I believe that yes, I believe that it has been constantly mentioned for many of the organizations and courts when you think about the national level as one of the newest paradigms that need to be followed up. One of the I initiated some months ago a project that is so big about organizations about global network for human rights and the environment. I represent the Latin America. I'm the director of the Latin America, and we started to a project within Alcaçuz settlement that we can have a little bit more about literature and events talking in English that said a little bit more about Alcaçuz. It goes beyond because I'm here in the USA and almost every time that we can read something about the Escazú is always related with the environmental defenders. That is something really nice, but it's not only these. We have many more principles in there that's well coded over here, as Joara said. And I believe that we didn't know exactly. We didn't have more knowledge about it, about this project. So we need to understand a little bit more, a little bit more about information in different places in the Latin American, Caribbean about this. And I believe that everything that we can talk, it's a change of paradigm because especially it brings a different face and always knowing a little bit more about the challenge of implementing this. That is well no change. It's a paradigm because we need to make it work. But I have been seeing I've been working in a responsible way, though, civil centers of climate law over here in Columbia University in New York. And we have a database about the litigants, climate change, when you think about the global. So we have all of these cases together, and I have been seeing that in the Latin America, the settlement of Alcaçu has been brought in the initial petition, some courts, as a reference in these cases of changed climate. So it brings this. That's something that I have been sharing that mentions beyond the settlement of Paris, the legislation, legislations that we have over here, and the settlement of Alcaçuz, as a paradigm that we need to follow when you think an access of justice and social participation, bringing more responsibilization within the society about the mitigation of climate change. So it brings this effective within a practical level. I'm not promulgating, but I believe that jurisprudence word is essential for this settlement to be implemented. We know that you have conflicts, you need to have a case for the judicial system to interpret, to make an interpretation and know about this. I have a question of Flavia Xavier from CGU that says a little bit more about, I will ask Joara and if Maria Antonia wanted. What are the prejudices, the social prejudice that has been working with different countries who already signed the settlement? And what are the practice from the companies who had this transparency within the social participation that you know that can be presented? Please, Joara. that because you mostly know everything. So please, you can tell me. How can you answer this question? Thank you so much.
Obrigada, Carlos. Obrigada, Flávia.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much, Clive. I will say that I'm honored to answer this because I believe that it's a nice thing about the social control that makes solutions. I would like to say that we have a lot of preserves of the countries who will sign this settlement later on. The first of them, I think about international cooperation because we are following these countries when you're trying to find the solutions within climate change, and we have a highlight for the countries who already been signing. So they have the security and they have more relevance on the international discussion. I believe that this is the first point. And during this negotiation of the climate and of the environment, we can see that these countries, as we can say about the leadership, the regional leaderships, and who demonstrate this commitment with this, have a position of the negotiation that's more relevant, or have a highlight within the power as putting their public policies ahead of different countries. I believe that you have a social prejudice when you think about international cooperation that's so big. And the second point, that's something that I said about budget. When you think about the public resources of international resources and national resources, the countries who already been signed the settlement, they demonstrate more commitment of sustainable solutions, and that's why they have an advantage when you think about those who are not signed, who not sign it yet. So also to bring a third example, let's think about their own civil society. We are talking about a moment that is so difficult about the climate solutions when you think about environmental protection. That's so important for us to know the rules of the game. Even for Carlos and Maria in the settlement of Escazú, and I believe that it's a rule and it's a way of have this governance, a sharing governance, and establish this. It's not something that will open up one day and I will argue it in the civil society, and the next day I don't have a good humor and I will do that. No, people are know that everything is settled and you can follow up, and the most people who suffers with this are on the biggest part who needed a solution, of people who need a public solution to enhance their capacity of gather water, of their professions who think about the environment. So they have a big prejudice with this, and I hope that Brazil can include himself within the whole of the countries who already ratified this, and only to bring a practical part in this point. When you sign this settlement, you are inside the table. You are over there to discuss in the next conference between the parts what are the next steps within voice, and you can vote. So this is essential. When you think about good practice and you think about it as a company, I'm not a specialized people on this. I know a little bit about the companies who already made it possible, the policies of access of information inside their systems of compliance, but I'm not a specialist within this, and I can send more materials about this. Oh, I believe there are people way more capacitated than me to talk a little bit more. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joanna. Maria Antonia, would you like to say a little bit more about this? I believe that it's relevant to mention that when you think about of the companies, that what we have seen is that they have been called to respond about the damage that they have been done. I believe that it's way relevant to know about the case of Shell on the island that were responsibilized by the mitigations of the emissions that they had. And mostly in the decision, all of the subsidy areas are need to maintain this responsibilization. So I believe that there is a decision that is started now and didn't exist in a context of the Latin America yet, but it's growing and will grow so much. So this is the tendency that we have, and I believe that each time it's more important for the companies to have this way up to know that it's adequate for the world rights of the environmental. Thank you so much, Maria Antonia. If I could say a little bit about this answer, CEPAL, the director of CEPAL, we are been doing a series of studies about the projects that we have, investments were sustainable. And we also have been asking ourselves about the three pillars of the social development, environmental, and we had a call in 2019 about the companies, and they presented the companies, the civil society also presented their actions and investments who were sustainable. And we identify almost 60 forms. They performed almost 100. And we understand 60 that had this idea of sustainability of the three pillars. And if you want to enter in our website, you can see cipao.org.brasilia that you can see what are the calls that we have for this follow-up of investment. We are also presenting this evidence to say and to make questions about this investment. We present a document, and many times this thing don't bring us, as we can say, in a various characteristics. We have the participation of the woman inside of the organization and want to do this study about the quality of the job. Because when you think about the gender and the formation, and also their own organization with this. So I'd like to say that if you want, it's not exactly in Alcaçu, but it's a sustainable practice inside this. I would like to make one more question for both of you. Maria Antônia, the judiciary system has a fundamental role in this question of environment. I would like to say the idea, I am a lawyer, and the idea of the diffuse rights. That's something I don't know. It's something more specific here in Brazil. When you think about this idea of general rights, about the Constitution, and to try to understand this, because I know that you can cover this and you have some penalties for those who doesn't work with this. Even if you have a question about the nicotine and cigarettes, about the health system. So this is my question for Maria Antônia. And for Zoara, how can you see the expansion of the discussion of the defenders of the environment? Recently, we had a webinar for 426 that we can understand that we have a presence of the Afro descendants of the movement, and it's really unique for those who are occurring from the situations, as always, from their countries, for example, in Africa and the Caribbean, who are really impacted by the climate changes. So, Maria Antônia, please, the first question, and later on, Joara can answer. And of course, we're thinking about information. How can we promote this in a debate and a role of this control system of the public system? I believe that most of the cases that we have about the we know we have this case based on this environment and effectiveness, and it's always being applicable to the companies. You have the standards that have been mentioned. We have not so much cases on the level support, but I believe that we have this interest in this decision that I said about Alan. We have cases on France and Germany, and it's all been growing because they bring on this aspect of the right of the environment when you think about the constitutions and we have this aspect of the human rights because the companies need to be responsibilized by this. Thank you so much, Maria Antonia. Your time. I'm a professor and I'm really glad to do this question for my students. It's good because we are learning. So thank you so much. I'm the one who's thanking you because I know that Sepal has a participation on this team. And when you think about the defenders, I know that recognizing is the first point. The people who work together within the territory, to recognizing when you think about the solutions and the protection about the environmental, and it's a different part of the society that we didn't understand. So the first point is to recognize that those persons exist and they have this knowledge who were accumulated that needs to be on the table of discussion, official table within the UN, or you can be inside another table, should be listened. I believe that this is the first point that we need. When you think about specifically about, I will say a little bit about mine expertise. And as I know, I'm a white people, but I had this on the decision of people who were losing their homes. This thing has been done without the impact of the environmental, without with a series of irregularities, and you can imagine waking up in the morning with a tractor on your door. So they were trying to get an SOS response. So you can recognize they have many irregularities inside the process and can know and paralyze this to know about the whole what we need to do and how can we do it within the public company. So in this first moment were fundamental because the people need to know that they have the right to know what's going on. So I believe that this is a case that I accompanied on my own, and I can see that really sometimes what we are missing is these informations because people need to understand that they can have these procedures. For example, an employee from the city hall, because I have many cases on daily that participate on this and that impact on the person's life when you think about environmental protection. So I believe that this brings reference for the groups when you think about have presented, each country have their characteristics, and I remind me so much about the transitions of the Caribbean countries that mentioned about the cooperation of the sub-regional cooperation that have a central point because I have a country that can captivate resources that were together most of the Latin American countries. And we can understand that we have this technical capacity of learning about this, who we are, and all the vulnerabilities that we have. Thank you so much, Suara. I believe that we are on the ending. I would like to say I would have your final word, and if it's possible, one item that the reference, that the conference of Alcazul can have a note, can quote. I believe that you have a various, but if you can find one item, then please talk to us, Maria Antônia. The definition of the committee of the support and implementation. I don't know if you're getting the translation because the name in that I study, but I believe that we need to define what can be done when you think about non-compliance within the settlement and how it can be effective. And I believe that this is the question that we need to define. I believe that within the mechanism of following, because we have been taught about this existing and we don't want that to lose as a settlement. When we are doing this, it's something that we need to debate. We have a question for Everton that said to us, if you have a risk of the settlement of Skazul to be used about the agriculture of the countries with the protectionism of economic. Maria Antônia, please. Can you say a little bit more about this? I believe that this argument is an argument that has been used for various countries for people who are refusing to sign this Skazul settlement, and it's something that it's not workable because when you think about the agencies of protection, they are already being there. They have boundaries to work to make this culture for those who are not sustainable, who didn't produce this, and I don't believe that the settlement of Alcazar said will change the rules of the game. No, I'm really 100% on agree with Maria Antônia because we see a little bit of disinformation when you settlement of Escazú. The people who don't know and create myths what are the settlements and their consequences. And my reading as a person who are accompanying this negotiation, I can see that the settlement brings these elements of a promotion of an agriculture who are sustainable and different measures who are sustainable that can have accountability and transparency about this project. And I believe that the major risk is for the countries who are over here. And I would like to say that we have many questions about sovereign of international within the schedule support. And my knowledge and the things that we can accompany is something that doesn't provide themselves. So I'd like to say thank you so much. If I can say a little bit about this answer, I would like to emphasize that this casus settlement established some rules. When you think about the debate, the solution, and if you have been using something, the whole team can have their mechanism. When you think about UNIC and when you think about this, you can show the settlement and the negative form of this. I can't actually say a little bit more about this. When you think about the sanctions, that we think about the state and the differentiation process is the environment. So I believe that it is a theme that's it's important, but it's not necessarily well. In case if you have a different question, I would like to say that we are gathering so much time after Maria Antônia, Joar, and you all, but I know that it's the last encounter, so I'd like to say so much about this. And we think about CGU, who has been translating. And I would like to say thank you so much. And this is the conclusion. I would like to say thank you so much for Maria Antônia, for Joara, Maria Antônia Tigre, Joara Marquezine, for your participation and their contribution. And we have this presentation who were so complimentary. We think about the discussion that we have and we can continue over here. I don't like to say that we have two conferences that are part of the Alcazul Sport. What you can promote and select this debate of the preparation of this. I would like to say thank you so much. Joara, please, thank you so much. As you will pass on this Brazilian government to have this participation and the debate of the federal debate. So have an excellent day for you all. As the last one of the year, I would like to say thank you so much for Brazil 2022. We'll consider this conference, but I believe that everyone who has been watched the 8 sessions can see a little bit more of what's Brazil and what we are doing in the area of access of information, the work of CGU, and also the, the role of different countries over here in Latin America. So I would like to say this north from Maria Antônia and mostly this for USA. So I would like to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation. I'd like to say I'm sorry for it, for if I said something wrong, because being over here it's so important to me. And thank you so much for your participation, for your study, for doing this. Thank you so much. And have an excellent day for you all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Thank you so much. Bye.